Namaste and a hearty welcome to Soft Talk. In this episode of the program, I'll be talking about this coronavirus pandemic that is hitting Nepal hard. It's not a single country that has been grappling with this public health crisis turning into a humanitarian crisis, but it is ill prepared to tackle a crisis of this proportion. So let me start. First of all, let me read some of the reports to just contextualize this situation. This is a My Republica report that says, let me start with our neighbor India. The report states that India's tally of coronavirus infection has already crossed 20 million. It's a country of, even for a country of more than 1 billion people, it's a huge number. India's tally of coronavirus infections has surged past 20 million, and that occurred on Tuesday. This surge is boosted by around 360,000 new cases over the last 24 hours. The number, just try to understand the gravity of the situation. Around 360,000 new cases over the last 24 hours. That's a huge number, even for a country a country with huge institutional capacity like India. The number of deaths during the last 24 hours was 3,449, and the total death toll as per the Ministry of Health stood at 2,22,408. India has become one of the hardest hit countries, probably the second one after the United States. It has witnessed 10 million cases. It has witnessed 10 million cases in a period of 4 months. That means these figures are meant to make you understand the gravity of the crisis that India has been grappling with. And we should also bear in mind is that a month after the pandemic peaks in India, a month or 15 days after the pandemic peaks in India, Nepal also experiences the peak of the pandemic. So these numbers should be just read and interpreted in that context. That's why I was presenting those figures. Okay, so now let's turn to Nepal. This report is quite important. It states that Nepal saw yet another highest single day rise of 7,448 new COVID-19 cases. It seemed as if we were heading for the Mount Everest of this crisis. Let me read a portion of this report. Nepal recorded 7,448 new cases of COVID-19, which is so far the highest single day rise in the past 24 hours. The highest single day rise. I was talking about Nepal peaking a month after India peaks in terms of the coronavirus pandemic. I seriously wonder if like it is the reflection, if the same trend that we saw earlier, that we saw during the last wave, during the previous wave of the coronavirus pandemic. I wonder if it is repeating again. And also to bear in mind is the fact that this strain, this pandemic seems to be more like lethal. Its morbidity rate, its mortality rate seems to be higher than that of the previous wave. This double variant, we call it, that is killing more people than the previous pandemic, than the previous strain of the virus killed. That is what I gather. And then comes another report. In the wake of this surge, in the wake of this deepening crisis, the chief district officers of Kathmandu, Lalitpur and Bhaktapur districts had a meeting. We had this prohibitory order, a week-long prohibitory order already in place. That meeting, the meeting of CDOs, the chief district officers held today, has decided to just extend those orders, those curfew orders, those prohibitory orders by a week. We have also read reports that the chief district officer of Lalitpur has contracted the coronavirus. Then one more report. This is part of the Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli's address to the country, address to the nation. He delivered that address yesterday. In that address, through that address, he made a solemn pledge that his government will not let people die of hunger during this wave of the pandemic. That is a very serious announcement. The Prime Minister in his address to the nation also directed the National Army to establish hospitals, COVID-19 hospitals, each having 1,000 beds in all 7 provinces of the country and in Kathmandu. This directive also indicates how this crisis, how this public health crisis is deepening and turning. It has the potential to turn into a serious humanitarian crisis. The Prime Minister, through his address to the nation, was just seeking to rally the whole country against this pandemic. He was taking it as a war-like situation that demanded that the whole country stand against this pandemic. Indeed, the Himalayan Times daily report also points that the Prime Minister plans to combat COVID on war footing. It's indeed a war-like situation. So it is quite appropriate on the part of the government to just seek to rally the whole country against this pandemic. The Prime Minister has also directed that hospitals, auditoriums, stadiums, warehouses, etc. Be turned into holding centers, quarantine centers, and isolation centers for dealing with this unprecedented crisis. In another development, the government of Nepal has suspended international flights, and that is up till May 14th. This is also part of this desperate bid to just curb this pandemic that comes in the wake of deaths in various parts of the country. Despite this cancellation, suspension of flights, the flights to India will continue. There will be 2 flights from Nepal to India a week, 2 flights a week, and the government has also decided to allow chartered flights. This is probably meant to bring Nepalese stranded abroad home, and to also evacuate, to facilitate the evacuation of foreign nationals stranded in Nepal during this crisis. So that is the plan, that is the idea, that is what seems to me. And then comes this now let's talk about this crisis. Let's talk a bit more about this crisis. This is like it's all great that the government has decided to just rally the country. The government has also pledged that people will not die of hunger, that it will not let people die of hunger. It has also decided to suspend international flights. Well and good, but then the crisis, if our experience is any guide, this lockdown, these prohibitory orders will not yield results if we fail to just step up security along the border with our southern neighbor. This border is open on our side and it is quite vulnerable. It is like every day whole lot of people enter into India from Nepal and vice versa. Not that alone, people from the extended neighborhood seek to enter into Nepal via Indian territories, taking advantage of the porous, of the informal, of the open border that we have on our side. So the state should just make its presence felt along the border. The state should step up security along the border if it really wants to just curb the spread of this pandemic. We should also be mindful of security concerns of our neighbor, India, and just take measures to make sure that suspicious elements do not enter into Indian territories from our territory, and we ask that Indian security authorities also just take into account our security and the safety of our people, especially during a difficult situation like this. It will be quite great if they could just step up security along the bordering territories to make sure that suspicious elements, suspected cases do not enter into Nepal from their territories. It's also their duty. It's as per this principle of good neighbors. Having said that, now let's return to the promise that the Prime Minister has made, his pledge that his government will not let people die of hunger during the pandemic. Despite his pledge, despite his solemn promise, little seems to have been done on the ground to make sure that people, the vulnerable lots, the factory workers, other people who have lost their jobs in this pandemic, vulnerable populations, they seem to be on their own at this pandemic, at this wave of the pandemic also. There seems to be no preparation on the ground to ensure their livelihoods. The promise is there, but preps are not on the ground to make sure that they get at least to eat, because they have lost their jobs and they have no means to sustain. Many people do not have the means to sustain themselves. That is when the state should step in and come to their rescue, but that is not what is happening on the ground. I have seen little preparations on the part of the government towards saving the most vulnerable populations. This means to say very sadly that we do not seem to have learnt lessons from the previous pandemic. Also to bear in mind is the fact that the previous strain of the virus was somewhat weaker than this one, this double variant. It has this high mortality rate, chances are that more people may die during this wave of the pandemic than the previous one. The government should indeed work on war footing to save lives, especially the most vulnerable ones. It should just step up the preparations on the ground to make sure that they do not roam around localities in search of food, because these roamings will increase the chances of communities just getting infected. Unlike during the previous wave, the government should do its best to make sure that people just do not return home weeping, crying, barefooted, empty bellied, because they had lost their livelihoods. It should just provide for the most vulnerable lot. It should come to the rescue of these people so that they do not roam around looking for food, looking for a, like asking for a bowl of rice, a bowl of hot lentil soup. So by just ensuring their livelihoods, by ensuring their livelihoods, the government would be just curbing the chances of further spread of this deadly virus. On this note, I wrap up this edition of Soft Talk. Please comment on my presentation, subscribe to my channel, and like my channel, give your feedback so that I can just add value to my presentations. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening.